Welcome to the technical briefing on the first phase of the Solid Waste Master Plan. Bienvenue à la séance d'information technique relative à la première phase du plan directeur de la gestion des déchets solides. My name is Kina Leclerc and I will be your moderator today. Je serai votre modératrice aujourd'hui. Scott Moffatt, Chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management, will provide some remarks and introduce city staff. Following staff presentations, Chair Moffatt will also moderate a question and answer session with members of council and their staff. 15 minutes after the end of the technical briefing, I will moderate a question and answer session for the media. Media wishing to participate can please make sure that your mic is off. Can email medias@ottawa.ca for registration information. Scott Moffatt, président du comité permanent de la protection de l'environnement, de l'eau et de la gestion des déchets, introduira les présentateurs aujourd'hui. Après les présentations, le président Moffatt animera une période de questions en compagnie des membres du conseil municipal et de leurs employés. 15 minutes suivant la fin de la séance d'information, je présiderai ensuite une autre période de questions destinée aux médias. Before I pass things over to Chair Moffatt, I'd like to go over a few Zoom items. I think everyone's familiar with Zoom now, but a friendly reminder to place your microphones on mute. In order to view the city official who's speaking on Zoom, you can put your view on speaker view, but I think this will be a little bit different given that we have the presentation. Veuillez noter que la présentation est disponible en français sur la page YouTube Ville d'Ottawa. I now pass things over to Councillor Scott Moffatt, Chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management, who will begin today's briefing. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you very much, Kina. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. I just want to start off by saying that I hope everyone is doing well, staying safe and healthy during these difficult times. Really just want to welcome everyone to this briefing. Very excited to be able to do this today, the Solid Waste Master Plan Phase 1 briefing virtually. So I'd like to welcome councillors. I know there's many of you on here. I saw your faces in your various states of office space. Welcome as well to members of the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee, city staff, and the media. Thank you again for joining us for this first ever virtual technical briefing from the City of Ottawa. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go over the first phase of the Solid Waste Master Plan. It's a 30-year plan that will help guide how the city manages all aspects of solid waste. Originally, we had intended to do this on March 30th at the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management. Unfortunately, we had to cancel that meeting for obvious reasons due to COVID-19. So while this is a new process for most of us, we've been doing briefings online for quite a while, and we wanted to make sure that we could move forward with our solid waste master plan. It's an important thing. It's not something that we should put off or delay any further, because obviously the landfill only has a certain amount of time. Our waste plans, our contracts, they all need to move forward, and we have the ability to do this virtually, and I think it's important. Ultimately, when we have the opportunity, we will bring this back to a committee in person, and we will take delegations, and we will have that ability to have that discussion more fulsomely. But we think it's important to at least go over phase 1 as we are already through the process of working on phase 2. So on that, I mean, obviously we have our city staff are out there every single day collecting our waste, and our folks that are working on this plan have also been working every single day to help advance this plan. So last July, you might recall the council approved the roadmap for the master plan, which outlined the process to design our 30-year plan in 3 phases. Phase 1 of the plan, which will be presented shortly, explains how we'll engage and consult with council, stakeholders, and residents throughout the next 2 phases. It includes baseline data on how much waste is generated in Ottawa, where it's going, our diversion rates, and how much waste that could be diverted is going to the landfill. It provides council with a review of the legislative authority of the different levels of government and the policy trends we're seeing in waste management at each level. Phase 1 also provides a scan of what other municipalities are doing and outlines emerging technologies to show us some innovative programs and practices as we begin developing options in phase 2. This data gives council the information it needs to make informed decisions about how we want to manage waste in Ottawa. It also provides residents and stakeholders the information they need to provide input on how we will manage waste in the future. In 2042, we expect the Trail Road landfill will be at capacity, and waste audits show that nearly 60% of waste that ends up at the landfill could be diverted. As we increase our understanding of what we do with our waste, we can make informed decisions on how to increase waste diversion and extend the life of the landfill. Today's presentation will be delivered by Shelley McDonald, Acting Director of Solid Waste Services, and Nicole Hoover-Benash, Program Manager of Long-Term Planning. Also with us today are Kevin Wiley, General Manager of Public Works and Environmental Services. For now on, I'll ever call that as Pub West. Pub West is how we call it internally. It's not actually, I just made that up. Marilyn Journeau, Associate General Manager of Pub West. Stuart Huxley, Senior Legal Counsel, Nazgul Damazi, Associate Legal Counsel, and Francois Lurie, Account Manager in Finance Services. They will be available to answer your questions following the briefing. I will now hand it over to Shelley McDonald.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Shelley McDonald, and as Chair Moffatt indicated, I am the Acting Director of Solid Waste Services. And I'm pleased to be here today with Nicole Hoover-Benash, who will be leading us through the presentation. I want to start off by saying Phase 1 is an in-depth assessment, not only on the current state of how Ottawa manages waste, but also on the many factors that impact how the city manages and designs its programs. That being said, we want to take the time to provide you with the information in Phase 1. So this presentation will take approximately 60 minutes. Please get comfortable, and we look forward to sharing this information with you and taking your questions. For your information, the French presentation slides will be shown on YouTube. As you know, there are significant policy changes in waste management happening at the provincial and federal levels that Ottawa will soon be facing. One of the objectives of Phase 1 is to inform Council of the tools and strategies at their disposal to influence waste management in Ottawa. Becoming familiar with this information takes time. The materials prepared are very comprehensive. I am proud of the thorough work completed by staff. The materials will provide you with a very good history and understanding of solid waste management. It lays the foundation for successful long-term planning as well as meaningful public and stakeholder engagement. The presentation today will include the background on the solid waste roadmap, an outline of how we plan to consult with and engage Council, the public, and stakeholders throughout the master planning process. An overview of the Municipal Legislative Toolkit, which will provide Council with an overview of the tools currently available for municipalities to influence waste management. An overview of the 5 technical memorandums, and finally, we will outline next steps, then take questions. To begin, we're going to briefly discuss the phases of the solid waste roadmap and any advancements that have been made since the roadmap report was tabled last year. The city's new solid waste master plan will be completed in 3 phases. Phase 1 of the master plan focuses on where we are at as a city. Later this year, the Phase 2 report will be presented to Council, focusing on where we are going. It will be developed through discussions with the public and stakeholders and will examine and consider long-term waste management needs, a triple bottom line evaluation, and a short list of options to be considered. Following the release of Phase 2, we will kick off more consultation with residents and stakeholders on the proposed options. Staff will also be conducting market research to validate the feedback. The Phase 3 report will bring the draft strategy to Council for consideration. It will recommend options and short-term implementation plans and targets. The recommended options will then be presented to residents and stakeholders for feedback, with the final strategy report planned to be presented to Committee and Council by the end of Q1 2022. I am now going to hand it over to Nicole, who will lead us through the remainder of the presentation.
So thank you, Shelley and Mr. Chair. So today marks an exciting milestone in the development of the city's new solid waste master plan, and I'm pleased to share the work done to date in Phase 1, which is going to help set the baseline and begin framing the important discussions to come in Phase 2. So since the roadmap report was approved by Council in July of last year, there's been some movement on a few key pieces of legislation at both the provincial level as well as federal levels, and also internationally, that we believe Council needs to be mindful of as we enter the next phase of the waste plan development. These changes will have an impact on how the city currently manages its waste, which is why it's important to understand how they will impact our waste management system. At the provincial level, progress has continued towards the windup of the Household Hazardous Waste Program, the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Program, as well as the Blue Box Program. However, it's not 100% clear at that time, or at this time right now, if that progress will be impacted by the requirements of the response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic emergency, but of course, this is something we are monitoring closely. These changes will fundamentally shift how recycling is typically managed throughout Ontario. So shifting the responsibility from the full management of these programs from municipalities to producers. The Municipal Household Hazardous Waste Program is scheduled to transition to producer responsibility on June 30th of 2021. So instead of the original wind-up date of December 31st of this year. As a result of these changes, Council will need to make critical decisions regarding the future of the city's current program, especially in light of the fact that it's expected that only a select amount of products currently managed by the city are expected to transition to individual producer responsibility. The Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Program is scheduled to transition to producer responsibility at the end of this year. And the regulations for single-use batteries were approved and released by the province in February of this year. And while the regulations for electrical and electronic equipment are still being updated as a result of provincial consultations. So it's still unknown at this point, the status of those regulations and how these changes will fully impact the city's program, but we are anticipating updates within the next few months. The Blue Box program is still set to transition to producer responsibility in 3 phases between 2023 and 2025. And the latest indications from the ministry are that draft regulations may be prepared and released for public comments as early as this summer, with final regulations in place by the end of this year or early next year. And while we don't know yet at this point how much flexibility the province will allow municipalities or producers in terms of timing, staff are preparing some of the important groundwork to help support future council decisions around this transition. And at the federal level, the federal government has taken the first steps to declare plastic as a toxic substance under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act through its issuance of its draft science assessment of plastic pollution earlier this year. It's unknown yet how this legislation will proceed. Ultimately, if this Parliament approves a ban on single-use plastics, any changes will have a trickle-down effect, which will require the city to adapt, as these changes are likely to have an impact on the types of waste our city will be responsible for managing. So that's why the master plan has been designed in a way to remain flexible and adaptable to future changes in legislation anticipated from our upper tiers of government. So over the past year, staff continue to work on the various component projects, which are a series of initiatives and commitments that were previously made through directions from council or commitments that we as staff have made to council. Similar to the series of technical memos being prepared to support the development of the city's waste plan, these projects will help either inform the master plan or future decisions required by council to support our progress on our future waste management system. So before we get into the details about the current state, we as staff believe council and the public will find it helpful to have an understanding of the approach we intend on taking to engage residents and our key stakeholders as we develop the waste plan, as well as the legislative toolkit, which provides an overview of the tools council has at its disposal to influence how waste is managed in our community. So as highlighted earlier, both by the chair and by Shelley, a robust communications and engagement strategy has been designed to ensure that residents and key stakeholders have adequate opportunities to engage in meaningful dialogue and to share their input, ideas, and feedback throughout the development of the waste plan. So engagement will happen in 3 series throughout phases 2 and 3 of the project. So engagement series 1 is set to kick off as early as next week, actually, and that will continue into July of this year. So, and the intent and the focus of this first engagement series is to engage stakeholders and residents in the development of the vision or the draft vision, goals, guiding principles and objectives for council consideration later this year. We'll also be seeking feedback on the current level of satisfaction with the existing waste system. And we'll also be, this is also an opportunity for us to understand what options and priorities residents and our stakeholders want considered within the waste plan. So a lot of the information we will be discussing today is really crucial in setting the stage for the discussions as part of this engagement series. So engagement series 2 at this point is tentatively scheduled to kick off later this year, so in December, and continue into February of next year. And the intent of this particular series is to allow residents as well as our key stakeholders to provide input into evaluated options that will be considered in the plan. Some part of the fundamental discussions at this point as well will be prioritizing these initiatives and having important discussions around how far and how fast, as well as how aggressive we as a community want to be. Engagement Series 3 will allow the opportunity for residents and key stakeholders to provide input into the final draft strategy, as well as a short-term implementation plan. So as a result of the physical distancing measures currently in place to combat COVID-19, we have to shift our engagement strategy to take that into consideration. So we have adapted it to be purely digital at this point, again, until this situation subsides. So this will include a series of online webinars, workshops, focus groups, and also taking into consideration that we recognize not all of our population has access to various technologies. So we will also be implementing phone-based focus groups for certain distinct groups that access to this type of technology might be a challenge. We'll have a series of online surveys as well as market research. And the strategy will be, the engagement strategy will be supported by targeted online advertising, earned media, social media, promotional kits for councillors and key stakeholders, our own advertising, as well as outreach materials that'll gear to be driving participation in the engagement series. So now shifting gears to the legislative toolkit, which is one of the most fundamental components of the Phase 1 report. And we believe it's important for council and the public to understand what the roles and responsibilities of the federal, provincial, and municipal governments in waste management, as well as having a clear understanding of the tools that council has available to them to influence how waste is managed in our community. So the regulatory framework affecting waste management is multi-jurisdictional and complex, with all three levels of government playing an important role with respect to varying elements of waste management. So municipalities constitutionally are creatures of the province, and many of our services are already constrained by legislation and regulation. So broadly speaking, municipalities manage the collection, recycling, composting, and disposal of household waste. Provincial governments establish waste reduction policies, programs and regulations, and approve and monitor waste management facilities and operations. And the federal government complements the role of provinces, territories, as well as municipalities by regulating the international and interprovincial movement of hazardous waste, identifying best practices that will reduce toxic pollution from the management of waste, and providing funding for projects to reduce waste sent to landfill. The legislative technical memorandum, which will be released in a package to members of council following this briefing, provides an in-depth review of the pieces of legislation at both the federal and provincial levels that regulate the management of waste. And we believe council and the public will find this information helpful, as they will significantly influence our waste plan, and we must align our strategies to ensure they do not conflict with federal and provincial legislation. So while all three levels of government may impact waste management and diversion, waste management is primarily regulated at the provincial level. So in Ontario, waste management and diversion regulations generally address two areas. So residential waste, as well as the industrial, commercial, and institutional waste. The Provincial Environmental Protection Act enables the province to regulate waste management systems, disposal sites, and the disposal or diversion of certain types of waste. Residential waste management and diversion services are mandated by provincial governments, but are carried out by local governments. So each municipality has the flexibility to develop its own waste management program, which is why you see varying approaches from municipality to municipality and how programs are provided to their unique and individual communities. And of course, this is done as long as they're in compliance with the applicable requirements of the Environmental Protection Act. Also important to highlight are regulations pertaining to waste generated by the IC&I sector impose the responsibilities for source separation of certain materials on the members of that sector. So municipalities have no formal or regulatory role in the management of waste in the IC&I sector. And as I will explain shortly in more detail, Council has access to very limited tools to influence how waste is managed in this particular sector. So beyond what I just highlighted with respect to the municipal role in managing waste, it's important to understand that that the city's role is twofold. So as the owner and operator of a waste management system, as well as an IC&I designated waste producer. As a waste producer, the city is required under provincial legislation to provide source separation programs in its larger office buildings and is required to conduct waste audits and prepare waste reduction work plans. As the owner and operator of waste management system, the city is required under the provincial regulations to provide blue and black box recycling as well as leaving yard waste system. Provincial legislation, most specifically, the Environmental Protection Act requires the city and any owner and operator for that fact to seek environmental compliance approvals to operate a waste management system or a waste disposal site. And the Environmental Assessment Act also imposes environmental assessment requirements on certain waste management projects undertaken by municipalities, so such as establishing a landfill or making changes to a landfill. And we believe Council will find it important to know that programs we are currently required to provide by legislation so as to ensure that we're not in conflict, but also to understand the approval requirements for waste management facilities as we begin discussions in phase 2 of the waste plans development, and as we consider various waste management facilities as well as technology options that might help meet the city's future needs. So when it comes to being an owner and an operator of a waste management system, understanding what tools Council has at its disposal to influence how waste is managed in our community is, as I highlighted earlier, probably one of the most important key takeaways for Council as we enter phase 2. The Municipal Act provides a single-tier municipality such as Ottawa with the power to provide any service or thing that the municipality considers necessary or desirable for the public. And specifically, it allows municipalities to pass bylaws respecting environmental well-being of the municipality, which includes the regulation of waste management and diversion activities through the enactment of bylaws. This means that Council has broad powers to widen the scope of the existing solid waste management bylaw through amendments or also through the enactment of additional bylaws to complement the solid waste management bylaw, as long as the amendments or regulations are authorized under the Municipal Act and of course are consistent with policies and regulations established by the province. Amendments to bylaws could set limits on the amount of waste that may be generated by residents, require the diversion of certain materials, determine fees for waste collection services, or set landfill bans for certain materials. So when it comes to the business licensing bylaw, Council also has broad powers under the business licensing powers of the Municipal Act, which allows the city to regulate, with few exceptions, any businesses operating within the city. Through the city's business licensing bylaw, conditions could be imposed as a requirement of obtaining or continuing to hold or renewing a license, which means Council could consider imposing conditions on some or all licensed businesses within Ottawa in order to influence waste management and diversion. So examples of some of the conditions that Council could consider include requirements for source separation or implementation of waste management and diversion plans. Council also has broad powers under the Public Affairs and Events powers of the Municipal Act, which allows the city to regulate cultural, recreational, and educational events, including public fairs. And through the city's existing special events bylaw, Council could consider imposing conditions on special events permits in order to influence waste management and diversion. Conditions could include requirements for source separation or implementation of waste management and diversion plans, as an example. And under the Municipal Act, Council has the powers to introduce new bylaws that prohibit or regulate certain types of waste, such as single-use plastics. As many members of Council are aware, various municipalities across Canada have enacted bylaws to regulate the sale of single-use plastic products, And as I highlighted earlier, new bylaws or amendments to bylaws will have to be reviewed in light of all federal and provincial regulatory requirements to ensure that they do not conflict. And of course, they will also have to undergo significant community and stakeholder engagement. When it comes to fines, the Municipal Act allows a single-tier municipality to establish fines, which can be used to influence waste management, such as bylaws restricting consumption or distribution of certain types of waste, and using fines as a deterrent. And lastly, the development review process is governed under the Planning Act and is guided by the city's official plan. Currently, the city requires that site plans must have space to be allocated for waste bins, but does not specify the type of bins. The official plan outlines the policies that the city uses to review development applications, and the current official plan does not address waste management. And as such, there is an opportunity as part of the official plan update or through future amendments to the official plan for council to consider requiring waste reduction or diversion plans to be submitted as part of development applications. So this is council's playbook, and as you can see, there's very limited ability to operate outside of these tools. And we believe council will find it helpful to have a clear understanding of these tools as we enter phase 2 of the master plan's development and consider the various options and opportunities to influence waste in our community. We'll be considering many, but they will have to align with the municipal role in waste management and the tools council has at its disposal, as they cannot conflict with provincial or federal legislation. And now that we've equipped council with this information, we're going to move on to the current state, which details how waste is currently managed in our community and how we're performing as a community as well as an organization. So the current state sets a baseline for where we are at today, and we believe council as well as the public will find it helpful to understand as we consider the various options, whether they be for improving upon the existing system or expanding and further bolstering it in future phases of the waste plan's development. And the current state technical memorandum that you'll be provided with later today will also serve as the benchmark to understand and assess future progress as we move forward with implementing this final strategy. So as members of council are very likely aware, the Ottawa is the largest city in Eastern Ontario with a population of 1 million residents and covers a large area of land. We have a distinct split of urban, rural, and urban communities. So this makes our city fairly unique from many of our comparative municipalities, and these attributes have various impacts on how we manage our waste and design our waste system. We provide service to 294,000 curbside homes, 1,700 multi-residential properties, approximately 240 city-owned facilities, 485 small businesses, 1,300 on-street waste bins, and waste bins located in the city's 900 parks. The city's core waste management programs include garbage, blue and black box recycling, and organics and leaf and yard waste collection. And this slide provides an overview of the waste that residents generated in 2019. And in looking at these tonnages, it's important to be mindful of what residents are doing in their homes, but also what they're doing outside of their homes in public spaces when they're out and about. So waste management is not just contained within households. And here's what we're seeing with respect to the amount of waste that's being generated through these various programs. So in 2019, the city's city's residents generated approximately 338,000 tons of waste from all property types. And this consisted of just over 187,000 tons of garbage, over 61,000 tons of recyclable materials, and over 89,000 tons of household organics and leaf and yard waste. The majority of it is generated by curbside households, 82% by the curbside households versus 18% being generated by multi-residential properties. So residents also disposed of approximately 330 tons of waste in city parks. And due to the fact that tracking of waste tonnages for our on-street waste bins began late last year, this data is not currently available for all of 2019. So this next slide provides an overview of what residents are doing with their waste. So for single-family curbside households, 58% of all the waste thrown in the garbage can be diverted through the city's curbside diversion programs. So in particular, 45% should be placed in the green bin, 8% in the black bin, and 5% in the blue bin. For our multi-residential properties, 58% of all waste thrown in the garbage could have been diverted through the city's multi-residential diversion programs. Approximately 39% should be going in the green bin, 12% to gray bin, and in the multi-residential sector, gray bin is responsible for managing glass, metal, and plastics, and 7% to the yellow bin, so that includes paper and fiber. And also the importance to highlight is that the city's overall diversion rate in 2019 is currently sitting at 44%. Our curbside residential is at 49%, and the multi-residential diversion rate is at 17%. So as you can see from that split, it's clear that the low levels of diversion in the multi-residential sector, it has quite a significant impact on driving down our overall diversion rate. And we know from our comparator municipal scan technical memorandum that our technical consultant prepared to support the development of the master plan that Ottawa has the lowest diversion rate amongst its comparators. But it's also important to be aware that it isn't always an apples to apples comparison with all municipalities. So as some of our comparators do not service the multi-residential sector, we're not required to under provincial legislation, as this particular sector is considered part of the IC&I sector. While some only service a portion of it, or overall some municipalities don't count it in their diversion rates. So this, however, is one of the key pictures that we understand council is looking to change through the master planning process. And we will be exploring options in phase 2 to address this. We believe it's important for council and the public to have a clear picture of where we are today in order to be able to build on and improve and to properly benchmark our future progression. Of particular interest will be the various policies, tools, and programs the city may consider to increase its diversion, some of which are highlighted in both the comparator municipal scan technical memos, as well as the review of waste management technologies and approaches technical memo. And both of these will be considered further as we progress into phase 2. When reviewing these materials, to be mindful, it's important to keep in mind that they serve as a preliminary scan, and while some of the options are proven and considered best practices to achieve greater diversion performance, many are still in their infancy or not much data is available on their actual effectiveness. So this will all be assessed further in phase 2 as we develop the options best suited to meet Ottawa's unique needs, but also to the vision that council sets forth. So in addition to these core programs, the city provides a number of other complementary diversion programs in place to further bolster our diversion rates. So the city provides a yellow bag program that provides garbage, recycling, and green bin services to 485 commercial businesses who heavily rely on this service. And we don't currently have metrics specific to this program due to the fact that the waste managed by this program is commingled with our curbside collection operations for efficiency and cost reduction purposes. And the city's Take It Back program encourages local businesses to take back many of the household materials that they sell in a convenient and safe way for residents. So as of 2019, the program had about 600 businesses accepting more than 100 different waste types. And members divert over 500 tons of material from our municipal landfill each year. So when it comes to electrical and electronics, none are accepted within the city's regular garbage program, and residents are able to take these back through the city's Take It Back program, as well as at our trail waste facility and through our household hazardous waste events. And last but not least, the city's household hazardous waste program, which provides mobile depot events across the city. In 2019, over 20,000 vehicles attended one of the 9 household hazardous waste events, and 692 tons of material was safely processed and kept out of the landfill. So each of these diversion streams that I just highlighted help to organize Ottawa's waste to ensure it's properly and safely disposed of. And as I highlighted earlier, under provincial legislation, the household hazardous waste as well as electrical and electronic waste programs will be shifting to full producer responsibility over the next few years. And as a result of this, council will need to be making some decisions in the next while to determine if and what they would like the city's role to be in collecting and managing some of these wastes in the future. And these decisions, of course, will have to be made when we have a more fulsome understanding of what the new regulations will entail. And again, these details are still in flux at this time. To support these various programs that I've just highlighted, the city utilizes various promotion and education tools to help drive and influence proper participation in these programs. Participation in these programs is largely influenced by promotion and education, but we also know from recent market research that we've undertaken and historical experience that if programs are too cumbersome to access, if they're not convenient, or they're hard to understand, residents will not participate in them. And we also know that a certain portion of our population does not believe in the benefits of recycling and diversion, which underscores the importance education plays in helping residents understand why these programs are so important, primarily to our environmental well-being. The city uses a number of tactics and tools to influence social behavior change, as well as to encourage residents to properly use the programs. So examples of some of these tools include the city's website, Waste Explorer search tool, our Recollect mobile application, collection calendar, outreach staff for events, and targeted campaigns such as our Glad Cleaning the Capital events. In 2019, the city spent approximately $292,000 on communication activities related to solid waste, promotion, and education, with about $163,000 spent on the ongoing campaign to inform residents of the changes of the Green Bin program, accepting organics and plastic bags and dog waste, $112,000 spent on general promotion and education, and more than $16,000 spent on social media messaging, specifically on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And one thing that these figures don't include are the various unpaid tactics the city has at its disposal and regularly uses, along with the 2 dedicated outreach staff that support community education and promotion for our solid waste services. So again, this provides council and the public with an understanding of what we currently do and opportunities to further bolster our education and promotion efforts with proven tactics and tools, as well as pilot opportunities, will all be up for discussion in subsequent phases of the waste plan's development. And a fundamental part of the discussions in phase 2 will be, is this enough? Should we be going further to help promote and educate residents to boost our diversion and participation in our existing programs? And we'll also be exploring options to focus more on the earlier R's in the waste hierarchy, so primarily waste reduction and reuse, which historically the city hasn't had a strong focus on. Ottawa's system to date has most heavily focused on the 3rd R, so that being recycling. So now that we've covered off the programs residents have access to manage their waste, the next few slides will focus on the mechanisms in place that are used to take the waste off for processing and disposal. So the city has 2 core contracts in place to manage curbside waste and multi-residential waste. So curbside waste is split into 5 zones across the city and provided by a mix of in-house and contracted service providers, which is awarded through a competitive tender process. And as councillors will recall, a new short-term 3-year contract was approved by council last year and will begin shortly and be in place until the end of May of 2023. And this short-term contract was designed to provide flexibility in responding to potential service changes resulting from the waste plan, as well as anticipated provincial legislative changes. The value of this contract in 2020 is $39 million. Curbside collection service standards include weekly green bin, leaf and yard waste collection, bi-weekly collection of blue and black boxes, bi-weekly garbage, and bulky item pickup, as well as bi-weekly special considerations program pickup. These service standards have and continue to play an important role in achieving the diversion rates and program participation that we have in place right now. And we know from the comparator municipal scan technical memorandum that the current setup we have in place, it is reflective of other municipalities and incorporates some industry best practices, but we also recognize that each municipality is different and have other service levels and collection programs in place that help drive diversion. And phase 2 of the master plan, as well as the service level options component project that's currently underway, will help explore other options, other proven policy options that council will be able to consider to help further drive curbside diversion and program participation. And as I highlighted earlier, some of the options that council will be able to consider are contained in the comparative municipal scan technical memo, as well as the review of waste management technologies and approaches technical memo. And the current multi-residential waste collection contract, which includes city facilities, is split into 2 zones, and it's awarded through a competitive procurement process. And our new contract is set to begin this June and will be in place until the end of May in 2025. And I think it's important to highlight too that the new contract includes changes to help enhance the participation in the city's green bin program. And it was also designed to allow future negotiations to sever off blue and black box recycling services once it's more clear from the province on how and when this program will transition to individual producer responsibility. So the value of this contract in 2020 is $7.9 million. And the service standards for multi-residential waste collection includes weekly garbage and blue and black box materials collection, bi-weekly collection of bulky items, weekly green bin collection, and additional garbage as required that is provided at an additional cost. So collection of waste from on-street garbage and recycling bins in the downtown core along our main streets and in certain BIAs is contracted to a third-party contractor. And the value of that contracted is calculated on a per unit basis. The city is in the process of replacing all single garbage bins or single stream garbage bins with 3-stream garbage and recycling bins, which is expected to help improve diversion as well as the management of litter in our public spaces. And the remaining on-street garbage and recycling bins are serviced under the city's integrated street furniture program, which the city receives a portion of advertising revenue to help offset costs of our other on-street waste bin collections. So waste collections from our city parks is managed intentionally by staff within the Parks, Forestry and Stormwater Services branch. And the approximate annual cost of citywide parks cleanup and litter maintenance program is about $2.4 million. And lastly, for special events under 500 participants, the city currently supplies, delivers, and collects green bin organics services free of charge, but this program is currently being reviewed to align with the corporate user fee policy. So once these materials are all collected through the various collection approaches, they're sent for processing at 4 main facilities. The city has a contract in place until 2023 with Cascade Recovery Plus for the processing and marketing of both blue and black box materials. Under this agreement, the city collects 100% of the revenue received from the marketing of materials. In 2019, the city sent approximately 24,000 tons of blue bin material and 37,000 tons of black bin material for processing and marketing, and the city collected revenues of $6.7 million from their sales. The city has a contract in place with Renewy Canada, formerly Orga World, and soon to be known as Convertus, for processing of household organics, pet waste, and leaf and yard waste. They use an aerobic tunnel composting technology. In 2019, the city sent just over a total of 80,000 tons of organic material to Renewy for processing. And the city also owns and contracts the operation of an outdoor windrow composting pad for the processing of leaf and yard waste collected separate from the green bin during the spring as well as fall peak leaf and yard waste seasons. And in 2019, the city collected approximately 9,000 tons of peak leaf and yard waste that was processed at this location. So given the level of interest expressed recently by members of council on how the recent program changes to accept the use of plastic liners and dog waste in the green bin program, as well as the impact of ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is having on our waste management system, I'm just going to shift gears slightly to provide council with what we know at this time. So regarding the green bin program enhancement, generally, we are seeing favorable trends as it relates to increased tonnages. We've seen an increase of 6% more multi-residential buildings implementing green bin programs since that program change was implemented last July. And the total number of plastics in the residual organic stream increased only slightly. So there's, and are still well below the maximum threshold required by provincial quality standards. But I think it's important to highlight that it's still early in the program change to draw definitive conclusions. Also, because tonnages are influenced by several factors such as seasonal and weather fluctuations, it alone is not necessarily a good indicator that more households are in fact using the green bin. And as we had committed to council, staff will be conducting a citywide waste set-out study later this year to measure program participation. This coupled with follow-up market research to be conducted by Hill & Knowlton Strategies will help the city in understanding the effectiveness of the ongoing communications and education campaign's effectiveness in shifting resident behaviors. And this combined will help provide us with a better picture of enhanced program participation. And our intent is to report back to council on this later this year. And on the topic of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our waste management operations, so we have seen a considerable increase in tonnages for all streams of waste in comparison to the same time last year. And the most considerable tonnages that you'll see here noted on the slide is that the green bin organics program has been experiencing increases of between 32% and over 300%. As it relates to tonnages incoming, specifically from the mid-March into the beginning of April. So now shifting gears back to our current state, all the programs and contracts we have in place that I've just covered are designed to maximize longevity of the city's owned and operated trail waste landfill. In 2019, the facility took in approximately 531,000 tons of material, with 225,000 tons of material being landfilled and the remainder being diverted or used for cover material and for the construction of roads within the landfill. Right now, based on current diversion rates, average inbound tonnages, the estimated life of the landfill is 2041. And there are very limited opportunities for further expansion of this important community asset. As we embark on phase 2 of the master plan development process, various options will be explored for council to consider in order to enhance the city's diversion efforts to help extend the life of this important asset. As it stands right now, 83% of waste received by the landfill comes from our various collections contracts. 17% comes from the IC&I or construction and demolition sectors. As an example, some of the crucial decisions to come in phase 2 of the waste plan will include whether council wants to continue practices such as this, and various options will be explored to help preserve the life of the landfill. Of course, the development of options will need to take into account the ultimate financial implications as well. Not only will most of the options have costs associated with them, they'll also have revenue implications, and these will be thoroughly examined as we consider each option in phase 2. So in addition to the trail waste facility, the city is also responsible for the care of a number of other landfill sites, including the Spring Hill landfill, the Nepean landfill, and over 44 closed landfill sites throughout the city. And as such, the city is liable for future closing costs and costs for monitoring and decommissioning landfills. As of December 31st of last year, the liability for the closure and post-closure costs for the city are estimated at $22.7 million. The city makes annual contributions to a reserve fund specifically for this purchase. And as of December 31st of last year, this fund was at approximately $5.7 million. So these future liabilities also play into the city's financial position. So a number of byproducts are created by our active landfill that require proper management in order to minimize environmental issues. Leachate, which is a byproduct of decomposing organic materials, is partially managed on site and is sent to the city's wastewater treatment center for further processing. The city also manages the generation of methane gases, which are released through the decomposition of organic materials in the landfill. The city currently has a very highly efficient gas collection system in place to capture this potent and hazardous environmental pollutant. And in 2019, 91% of all methane produced at the landfill was captured through this system. Through the city's partnership agreement with Power Trail, some of this gas is used to generate renewable energy, and the city does receive annual royalty of approximately $200,000 from this agreement. This is an example of one of the ways that the city has started to engage on the 4th R of the waste hierarchy, that being through energy recovery. Phase 2 of the master plan will explore other opportunities the city will have to potentially expand their recovery efforts, a preliminary overview of what options may be available for the city to consider, and included in both the comparator municipal scan as well as the technology technical memos. And these options will also be reviewed and considered in the context of helping achieve the city's goals outlined in the council-approved climate change master plan, as well as through the city's energy evolution strategy. So now that we have a fulsome understanding of our residential waste system and the role that the city plays as an owner of a waste management system, we believe it's also important to be mindful of the role the city plays as an IC&I waste producer, including our reduction and diversion programs and policies. So the city manages and operates approximately 240 city facilities in which waste is generated by staff at work as well as residents visiting the facilities. And this slide highlights the diversion rates in each type of our city facilities. And this was based on a recent audit that was undertaken in December of last year. And notably, facilities that are predominantly administrative in nature have higher diversion rates than those often visited by the public. The city also has a number of important progressive programs and policies in place that influence how we manage our own waste. So this includes the city's green building policy, the soils management program, sustainable purchasing guidelines, and sustainable purchasing toolkit. These and more are highlighted in more detail in the current state technical memorandum. And the city will begin to thoroughly explore further opportunities to build on these initiatives in subsequent phases of the strategy's development to also help the city improve its own performance, as well as to position us as a leader in reducing our waste footprint and enhancing our diversion efforts. What may be of particular interest to you, Council, will be the information contained in the comparator municipal scan, the technology approaches technical memo, as well as the policy trends technical memos, which highlight some of the innovative and progressive policies other municipalities have undertaken. Just a cautionary note, though, that these documents contain high-level information and do not provide insight into whether these programs and initiatives are in fact achieving the results that they've set out to achieve. And this will be explored further in phase 2 in the context of what options Council would like the city to consider unique to its own needs. So last but not least, on the topic of the current waste management system is how the city currently funds its waste management system. So the city currently uses a hybrid funding model where waste diversion recycling costs are funded by all tax classes from the assessment-based tax bill and costs for garbage collection and landfill disposal, costs such as the landfill liability and annual contributions to the Capital Replacement Reserve Fund, and some overhead administration are being funded only by residential and multi-residential properties through the implementation of a uniform flat fee. In 2020, the average Ottawa household paid approximately $139 for solid waste services, so $43 for waste diversion and recycling costs and $96 for waste collection and disposal. And the average residential condo paid approximately $84, so $27.50 for waste diversion and recycling and $56.50 for waste collection and disposal. The total budgeted cost to provide waste services to our community in 2020 is approximately $86 million. The city does receive a mix of funding and revenue to support these costs, which include, which are made up of various funding and revenue paths, including funding from our recycling programs, our Take It Back programs, provincial subsidies, and revenues from solid waste user fees, our sale of recyclable materials, the Trail Road landfill tipping fees, the Yellow Bag program, as well as internal cost recoveries. And in 2020, the City Solid Waste Services branch has budgeted revenue of approximately $59 million. The city's 2020 capital budget is $6.6 million, and the city's current, as we embark on phase 2, we will be exploring and evaluating alternate funding models and approaches, including some of those observed through the municipal comparator scan. We'll also explore the financial implications of each option, as we recognize Council will want to consider the financial impacts not only of each option, but also from a holistic understanding of the impact on the various options will have on the master plan. So as I alluded to earlier, all of the options will also be evaluated to consider balance not only the financial implications, but environmental and social considerations. How much more residents are willing to pay for these services is another important thing that we will need to be mindful of through this process. And this will need to be discussed with residents and stakeholders through our various engagement series. But ultimately, we will have to be mindful of the impact that our waste plan will have on our user fees and the general tax base. And the intent of the master planning process is to evaluate all options holistically, as I had highlighted, to understand the overall financial impact and affordability as we draft the final strategy. So this master planning process is no different than any master planning process. They're all about discussing and determining how far and how fast we want to move. So now that we've covered our baseline system and have a clear understanding of how we're performing to date, a fundamental part of moving forward into phase 2 and exploring and evaluating options will involve having a good understanding of what our peer municipalities are doing to help gain some insight into how their programs are, the type of programs that they have in place with respect to the 5 R's waste hierarchy. So that focusing on reduction efforts, reuse, recycling, energy or recovery options, as well as their ultimate residual disposal of waste options. So as I highlighted throughout the presentation, our technical consultant undertook a scan of what the city's comparator municipalities are currently doing in the field of waste management in order to help provide insight into some innovative and progressive material management strategies, practices and initiatives that might be of interest to the city as we begin developing options that may meet Council's vision as well as Ottawa's unique needs in phase 2. The primary focus of the scan was to highlight the 5 R's of waste management, in addition to some additional areas of interest, which are listed here on the slide. And I just want to caution that when reviewing this document, not to assume that these programs are necessarily achieving goals that they were set out to achieve. I know I highlighted this earlier. That information is not always readily or publicly available, and this type of information will be explored further as we identify the options that will help meet Ottawa's unique needs and Council's vision, goals, and objectives for the plan. And depending on the option, it may even require further research and study in earlier phases of the master plan's implementation. So the 8 Canadian jurisdictions were selected based on how comparable the demographics are to Ottawa. These municipalities include Halifax Regional Municipality, York Region, including the City of Markham, Durham Region, the cities of Guelph, Toronto, and Calgary, Metro Vancouver, including the City of Vancouver and the City of Surrey. The region of Peel was also selected as well for its innovation multi-residential waste diversion. Just a fun fact that Ottawa, Toronto, York, and Peel make up the greatest percentage of multi-residential densities in all of Ontario. So as you can see from the chart on this slide as it relates to waste diversion, Ottawa has the lowest rate amongst its comparators, and Ottawa's waste generation rate is in line with many of its comparator municipalities. Just of importance to note here too, these numbers reflect 2018 diversion rates, so you'll note that the diversion rate listed on here is a little bit different from what I had highlighted earlier in the presentation that focused on 2019 numbers. As I highlighted earlier in the presentation, there's plenty of opportunity to improve Ottawa's diversion performance, and the options outlined in this particular technical memo will help provide some insight into some of the options that can be further explored in phase 2. Also, to help set the stage for discussions to come in phase 2, our technical consultant undertook a review of international, national, and provincial policy and trends that will help Council and the public understand where our upper levels of government are trending, what the potential trickle-down effect we can expect will be, and how that will influence the direction of Ottawa's waste plan. It will also provide an overview of some of the key trends happening in the industry that the waste plan will have to consider options to respond to. So this information will also be important in informing discussions with Council and the community to develop the vision for the strategy, the core guiding principles that will guide the waste plan's development, along with its objectives and goals that we want to achieve through the master plan. As I highlighted earlier in the presentation as well, we have to ensure our services and programs are aligned with provincial and federal legislation. And not only does this technical memo highlight the key trends at the provincial and federal levels, but it also provides an overview of some of the key international trends. And what we're seeing internationally tends to give us a good indication of where our federal and provincial governments tend to follow suit. As an example, circular economy principles, single-use plastic strategies, landfill taxes, and food waste strategies are strong international trends, and our upper levels of government are taking interest in these various approaches in developing legislation aimed at influencing the management of waste across Canada and across our province. Staff felt that Council would find it important to have an understanding of some of the Council and the public of some of the societal demographics, as well as other key industry trends as we enter into the next phase and how they will need to be considered in the plan. So while this technical memo provides a lot more detail than what I've highlighted here, some of the trends that we will need to be considered include the increased reliance on technology, convenience and cheap goods that are impacting decisions consumers are making, and thereby impact the amounts as well as the types of waste that we as a municipality are required to manage. The increase of packaging material as people shift from brick and mortar shopping to e-commerce, the shift to compostable type products and packaging that companies are using to respond to the need for good environmentally sound products and packaging that are ultimately having an impact on our waste management systems and introduce a whole host of other complexities. Lastly, our technical consultant also prepared a technical memo on the various technologies and approaches used to address the 5 R's of the waste hierarchy to provide council and the public with an overview of what can be considered as we develop the waste plan. In phase 2, we will begin to narrow the options to those relevant to the city's unique needs and also those relevant to council's vision for this strategy. The next slide provides some high-level examples of what's outlined in the memo, but the memo contains a lot more comprehensive overview of which highlight the various different technologies and approaches, details on whether these technologies are proven or emerging in managing municipal solid waste, known case study highlights, high-level estimated costs, environmental considerations, public health and financial considerations. So having an awareness of what is available currently in the industry is important to understand to manage municipal solid waste that could possibly be applicable to the city's future solid waste management needs. And then as we embark on discussions early in phase 2 on developing the vision, objectives, and goals for this strategy, we will begin to discuss with council, the community, and our key stakeholders how innovative, progressive, or pragmatic we want to be as a city. And as part of phase 2, we'll want to explore technologies that align with Ottawa's unique needs and council's vision, goals, and objectives for the plan. We'll also explore opportunities to take a balanced approach to making an investment in options that are largely proven, while also still accommodating opportunities to trial some of these unproven technologies in an attempt to be at the forefront of finding new ways to manage difficult waste streams that may perhaps be able to be considered on a more full-scale basis if successful in future iterations of the master plan. So now with a core understanding of the work done in phase 1, including our baseline system, how we currently performing, what legislative tools council has at its disposal to influence the management of waste, along with an overview of the key pieces of influencing legislation at upper levels of government and the industry trends that will have an impact on our waste plan. The city, we're now set to begin phase 2 of the master plan's development. So building on the work done in phase 1, next week we will begin discussions with our key stakeholders and the community to start developing the proposed vision, guiding principles, goals, and objectives of the solid waste master plan, which will be presented for council's consideration later this year. We'll also continue work with our technical consultant to identify the city's future needs through the development of waste projections for the various streams of our waste managed by the city. And this is done also in conjunction as we update the city's new official plan and have a better sense of how our city will be growing over the next 30 years. Our technical consultant will undertake a comprehensive needs assessment analysis to understand our short, medium, and long-term needs, which coupled with the strategy's vision, guiding principles, objectives, and guiding principles will help us identify and evaluate options to meet these needs over the 30-year planning horizon. A tool will also be developed to evaluate these options objectively. And it will use a weighted approach that balances social, environmental, as well as financial components of each of the options, or combinations of options as well. This tool will be validated by key stakeholder groups, including the Councillor Sponsors Group, the Stakeholder Sounding Board, our City Champions Group, and key city staff. Staff will report to Committee and Council by the end of 2020 with a recommended vision, guiding principles, goals, and objectives for the master plan for Council's consideration. And that will include an overview of the comprehensive needs assessment analysis, the long list of options that will then be evaluated, shortlisted, and consulted on for consideration in the draft solid waste master plan. This will then set the stage for the development of the final draft strategy. And I think it's important to highlight that the master planning process is not entirely linear, but rather will explore opportunities for short, medium, and long-term investments to meet council's shared goals. We'll also include many opportunities for measurement so that as the process moves over the next year from the conversations to our choices and ultimately to a final plan, council and residents will be able to clearly see progress on council's shared vision and the value for their investment. And that brings us to the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Nicole. Much appreciated. Really wasn't that long at all. Geez, it felt like 3 minutes. Good job. So I do want to just let everyone know that if you want to speak, I'm going to run through exactly who's here. We're going to go to councillors and assistants. So if you want to have a question, please let me know through the chat box. It'll just make it easier for me to manage exactly who wants to speak. So we have councillor from our sponsors group, and I know Nicole just mentioned that councillors that sit on that sponsors group with me include Laura Dudaz, Sean Menard, and Eli Alshantiri. They're all here with us today. We also have councillors Jenna Suds, Catherine McKinney, Teresa Kavanaugh, Jan Harder, Riley Brockington, Glenn Gower, Ralston King, Jeff Lieber, and just to bring some attention to Jeff Lieber for a second. If you remember a couple years ago in the NBA, they started selling sponsorships on their clothing. Well, one of the challenges we have at the city right now is revenue issues. So what we've done is with all these meetings, we've actually allowed councillors to have sponsorship opportunities on their clothing. And Jeff is wearing 3 such sponsorships right now on his shirt. So big thanks to Nike and all those who are supporting Jeff and supporting the city of Ottawa at this time. So also councillors Jean Cloutier and Matthew Fleury are with us. And we have a number of assistants representing the various offices as well. Robin Needleman from Tim Tierney's office, Chelsea Walton from Glenn Gower's office, Tom Peckloff from Jeff Lieber's office, Rosa Ramos and Heather Tessier from Jan Harder's office, Megan Muldoon from Jenna Studs' office, Rob Sebring from Diane Dean's office, Stephanie Johnson from Ralston King's office, Alex Corey from Councillor McKinney's office, Andrew Hickey from Riley Brockington's office, Patrick Murphy from the No Councillor's office, Ward 19, and Danielle McGee from the Mayor's office. After that, we'll also allow questions from the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee, and we have 2 members of that here today, Iqbal Jaswal and Corey Peabody. So first on the list, Councillor Hughley's here as well. He's under a number. He's like one of those Ontario Inc. numbers. So he's here as well. I just see his name there. So first we're going to go to Councillor Kavanaugh.
That was a surprise. I wasn't expecting to be the first. Anyway, thank you very much for the presentation, Shelley, and all the information. I think we all want to get to the goal of reducing, and I appreciate that we've made a lot of efforts so far. I think multi-residential buildings are probably the next big target, and I want to know in terms of what we're asking developers and making it easier for tenants to dispose, because we have an opportunity here, especially with a lot of infill and intensification going on, of making it easier if we can get those measurements that are put in. Just to add on to that, I'm on the committee for client services for Ottawa Community Housing. And so I get a chance to ask them about what their efforts are. And I find that it's not as good as it could be. And this is a partnership that we work very closely with. And I want to know if we can do better, because we know it's not good enough. And some of it is just some frustration and confusion with the Ottawa Community Housing side versus the city of how to do it better. And I'm hoping we can get a better working relationship there, because I'm hearing about that it's not, it's not perfect. Here's a little dumb thing. We hear about blue boxes for houses, but they don't do a blue box for a multi-residential area for Ottawa Community Housing. And that was really odd. It's a yellow box or something. So it throws people off. It's silly little things like that. Anyway, I just want to get some comments on that and what we can do better on those things.
And absolutely, Councillor. So as you highlighted, there's a tremendous opportunity to improve in that particular sector. And it's not unique to just Ottawa. We know that the multi-residential sector tends to be a challenge for every single municipality. So I think there's a couple things through the master plan. We will absolutely be exploring a number of different options, especially as it relates to our abilities to influence from the development perspective. So as I highlighted in the legislative toolkit component, we do, our council does have some authority and some influence in that regard. So we will be exploring options. We're also, one of the component projects as part of the master plan is focused on developing a multi-residential diversion strategy. So we're going to be looking at where there are opportunities to, where there might be some short-term opportunities to increase diversion and some longer-term opportunities through that. And you highlighted some really good points, and we know from the most recent market research that we did last year from Hill and Knowlton studies identified that some of the biggest barriers to individuals living in multi-residential facilities really is about access, lack of convenience, but also not having a general understanding of how to access those programs. So there's a couple things that we're doing in the short term. So as part of our new collection contract for the multi-residential properties, we have, there are two main changes to that contract. So we've allowed green bin, we've moved green bin collection from curbside onto multi-residential properties. And what that means is facilities no longer have to be able to take out their green bin to the curb every single collection day. And we do currently have a multi-residential working group that we're working with, and that was cited as the number one reason for, more so from the property management, from participating in the program. So we're predicting that with that change, there will be a number more buildings that will participate. And then we're also looking at opportunities as we're shifting over to this new contract, and we're encouraging new buildings to participate. We're also looking at opportunities to have further outreach staff helping educate residents as we introduce those programs. Unfortunately, that's been put on hold at the moment due to the COVID-19 situation, but we'll be exploring too as we move past this, how we can continue moving forward with that.
Well, I hope we will make a special emphasis on Ottawa community housing, because that's a partnership that we have that's very strong. Yeah. And I think it'd be a great example to lead with. Yeah. So I urge you to have a relationship with that. I'll let my colleagues ask questions next. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Teresa. So our second councillor will be Catherine McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. It's nice to see everyone. And thank you, Nicole, for that presentation. That was really laid out a lot of the work that we have ahead of us. Our diversion rate is disappointing. We all bear responsibility for that, but I think that we have a plan going forward where we could, with the right programs in place, and some of them will have to be bullish. We will be able to change that, and hopefully we can join other municipalities in their rates. They're much better than ours. So I look forward to it. I just had a couple questions. First, I just wonder if we introduced plastics into the green bin for folks who wanted to use that to dispose of their organics or kitchen organics and whatnot. And that happened in mid-2019. So I just wonder if we have any data on whether that's increased our green bin participation since mid-2019.
So to that first question, so it's still a little bit early in the process, but we do know our green bin tonnages have been increasing. So we've seen quite a promising trend, but that's solely taking a look at the tonnage perspective, and that doesn't necessarily indicate if more households are participating. So what we're going to be doing later this year is undertaking a citywide participation study. So that's going to give us a better understanding in comparison to the last time we did a participation study before those program changes were implemented, how many more households might be participating. But also coupled with that too, we are doing some follow-up market research with Hill and Knowlton studies. We currently still have our green bin promotion and education campaign that's ongoing. And the purpose of that market research is to get some anecdotal, or sorry, not anecdotal, but some evidence behind whether or not our promotion and education efforts are truly having an impact on being able to shift resident behavior. So trends are promising right now, but we'll have a better sense once we conduct that participation study.
Okay, I look forward to that. And just one last question, I'm picking up on what Councillor Kavanagh was referring to with our multi-residential diversion strategy on this, in the downtown. A majority of residents live in multi-residential units, and I hear from many often. I mean, we have some landlords and building managers who have taken advantage of our programs to go in and help with the organic diversion, but if we don't get that buy-in, it can be very difficult. So certainly, as we move forward with development review, development applications, to ensure that that is built into the structure, so that you can have organic diversion. That's very difficult to retrofit in an older building. But you had mentioned, and my question is, you had mentioned that Peel region had some innovative programs that has increased the multi-residential diversion in that municipality. Can you just give us a bit more information on what that is, just so we can start thinking about it?
So of course, more details, some very good detail is included within that comparator municipal technical memo that we'll release to members of council shortly. But you're seeing a couple of different things. There's different unique programs, more so from the outreach perspective, so more dedicated outreach and education for particular facilities. There are also our beyond just Peel, some other municipalities too that have really focused heavily on the development process and the design of new buildings. We've also seen some innovation, I guess, with chute closures. So we know a number of our older facilities, especially before recycling was a thing, have chutes in place. So exploring different opportunities to close those. So it's forcing residents to actually physically bring down their garbage along with their source separated materials. But a lot of it does stem and focus on more of that focus on outreach and promotion and education efforts.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I was going to say one other thing to highlight. It's interesting, as you had mentioned too, we know from our recent waste audits, which are detailed more in the current state, but for those properties that do have green bin programs in place and have strong dedication from their property management, they do have quite significantly higher diversion rates, which is amazing, but it also further highlights the investment and the time required by property management staff and supervisory staff on also helping push and drive that education within their own units.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well, is when somebody wants to do it in a multi-residential, when a group of people, they're very, very dedicated to it. And so thank you.
Thank you,
Scott.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now to the ward that will not expand into mine during the urban boundary discussion, Canada South. Councillor Alan Hughley. Alan, are you there?
I will just unmute him just a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Hubley, are you there? Oh, I think he just got off. So perhaps we can go to, oh, there he is.
Alan?
Yeah.
Alan Hubley?
We can't hear you very well, Councillor Hubley.
I think he's talking to someone else. Okay,
Okay.
I'm gonna,
No, I'm okay with that.
okay, let's
So something's coming out on this, then they'll.
can we mute Alan because he is on a phone call? Thanks. Glenn Gower, you're fourth. We'll go back down.
Okay, yeah, good morning from Stittsville. Thanks for the presentation. I had a question, two questions. One is about, you mentioned alternative funding sources. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, so alternative funding sources in the sense that we will be exploring certain options that you'll probably see in some of these technical memorandums. It could include different curbside policy options. So tag a bag as an example. When it comes to funding sources for implementing new technologies, as an example, there are opportunities with the federal government to help with some of the cost sharing. So exploring those opportunities. So that's just as an example of some of the different opportunities we'll be looking at.
Okay. The other question was, in terms of surveys to determine things like green bin usage, how granular do you intend to get? Like, will we know on a ward by ward basis, or could it even be more specific than that in terms of different neighborhoods or streets and so on?
So when it comes to, we can get into the granularity of the specific data based on the street, but just recognizing too that it is a sample that we're going to be taking a look at citywide. So as we get into that granularity, it might not necessarily be representative, let's say, of a particular award. Diversion that we're seeing or participation that we're seeing specific to a ward or specific to a community.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. I think Alan, are you available now?
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me, Scott?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on a call related to another issue. But listening in, very good presentation. Thank you. I trust we're getting a copy of this deck. Will be coming out.
That's correct, Councillor. It'll be issued following this technical memorandum or this technical briefing.
Great. Okay. I'd like you to expand a little more on what you're doing about exploring new technologies and seeing what we have that we'll be able to use in the future.
Sure, absolutely. So so along with today's presentation, we'll also be providing members of council with a copy of our staff report, as well as all of the technical memorandums supporting the work that we've done to date. And one of them does include a very comprehensive overview of the varying technologies that are currently available throughout the world for managing different waste streams. So that's going to give you some insight into what might potentially be available for us to consider as a city. Again, it's a high-level overview because as we enter into phase 2, that's when we're going to be working with our technical consultant to have a comprehensive needs assessment analysis done. And that's going to help us identifying, coupled with council's ultimate vision for this plan, the different types of options that we would want to consider, again, unique to our needs, unique to our particular streams of waste. So I won't go into the details of all the different technical the different technologies that we are looking at, but it's also some of those larger technologies that we might be looking at in the future to manage waste, let's say beyond the life of trail landfill. But it's also going to look at some of those more smaller, more micro technologies that we can consider for our collection fleet. So as an example, having an understanding of where we're at with respect to electrical vehicles. Or electrical collection fees. So it does provide a very broad spectrum and a fair amount of comprehensive detail as to what's out there right now, what's proven, but also what's still in a pilot phase.
So would you consider Durham, the waste management system they're using in Durham, as a pilot, or is that something that you're looking at that we could use during, like, to get in place during the life of Trail Road, not after?
So I think that's, well, no, that I wouldn't consider, that's more of a proven technology when we're talking about the mass burn incineration. But again, well, through that comprehensive needs assessment analysis, that's really going to help us in identifying, first and foremost, if we're focusing a lot of our efforts on diversion, if that's where council wants to go, that will ultimately have an impact on the life of the landfill, potentially extending that. So then that would consider pushing, you know, when it is that we're going to look at the next option to replace trail, and also recognizing too that a lot of these different technologies, but landfills as well, require quite a lot of lead up time, going through, first and foremost, assessing the different types of technologies that we want to consider, but the environmental assessment approvals, siting at these different facilities. So presumably some of that work would happen while the existing Trail Road landfill would be in place.
Okay, thank you very much. That's my questions.
You're welcome, Councillor.
Thank you so much, Alan. And we're going to go on to Councillor Leeper, and I have Councillor Brockington after that, and then nobody. So if anybody else has questions, please let me know, either in the chat box, yell at me on Twitter. I get that a lot. So that's an option for you. You can send me a text. My phone number is 613-894-1131. You have plenty of options. Thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Scott. Just to follow up on Councillor Hubely's questions, Nicole, I think in the presentation, you spoke about the Trail Road facility having an asset value of $42 million or so. I'm assuming that's not the replacement value. Do we have a notion of how much it would cost to actually build a new landfill?
So you're correct, Councillor. So that doesn't include what the actual cost of replacing that would be. So when we look at comparison, as an example, Toronto, when they purchased their new landfill, it was in and around the cost of $250 million.
Yeah.
So between 150 and 300 million.
Thanks. I think that's good information to have out there, because that's what we're looking at as a potential $250 million replacement when and if we have to replace the Trail Road facility. My second question is with respect to the residual plastics in the organics stream. You mentioned that it has gone up slightly. Can you delve into that number just a bit?
Absolutely. So prior to the program change, we saw, sorry, actually, I'm just going to grab the actual data just to make sure that I don't get it incorrect. So we were at 0.01 when it came to the plastics that were under 2.8 millimeters. So 0.01%. Now we're at a 0.1%. And
Okay.
the provincial threshold is 0.5%.
So it's, sorry, from 0.01
Correct.
to 0.1?
That's correct.
Okay, tenfold. That's my question. Thank you very much, Scott. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Riley-Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. Very much look forward to the presentation and how this evolves over the next few months and throughout the year. I just start with some general comments. I think we share the concern and disappointment with Ottawa's low diversion rates. I think for a city as educated and dedicated to the environment as Ottawans are, we're not doing a good enough job. And I think our collective goal is to boost that number up really as high as it can go. I do not want to build another landfill in this city. We should not be planning to build another landfill in this city. We should be doing everything possible to get our diversion rates as high as possible, because I don't think in 2040 we want to have a society or municipality that is building new landfills. I think with the technology that will be available and the tools that we already have with us with organic black and blue waste collection, why we can't get those diversion rates up even higher. So I noted that your data, Nicole, you cited was 2018. It's important for folks to note that because that was before the July 1st changes we made to the green bin. And I've been very, very interested in seeing your data. So you've been able to present us data as recently as a few weeks ago. You gave us the weekly stats, which are really good, but we've been delayed in getting those stats from July 1st. So are you able to give us monthly green bin tonnage numbers from July 2019 and compare it to 2018 and just go all the way up to April?
Absolutely, Councillor. So one of the slides that we do have included in the presentation that will be shared after, it actually includes you month by month since the program changes in July, and we actually compare it to the past 5 years. So you can see that trending.
Okay. I don't know if it'd be a benefit to the committee, but I'm very worried about the switch or the transition with our hazardous waste depots, the battery collection, the electronic collection, putting the onus on, I think it's the seller. Can you just give us maybe a one-page highlight on these three about the exact dates that this is going to happen, and how do we envision the average household will need to behave as far as to bring back these things? Because I think if the committee highlights some concerns that we have just with this process now, right now we have dedicated sites, you guys create calendars, people can plan for it, they save it up, they go to a depot, they get rid of it. In my mind, that works pretty well. There are issues about your geographic locations, but as far as having the professionals on site to dispose of it safely, I really like that. I really like that. And I'm worried that it's not going to be as effective if we switch. And the other thing I need more information about is the collections in parks and special events above 500. So I want to applaud you for providing green bins at events less than 500. And I do acknowledge there's a cost there. But I think at the end of the day, in working with some of our larger events, there's an opportunity. I mean, we can't think that it's okay to have large events and not have recycling or green bin opportunities. And so I'm very keen with that as well. And finally, I'll just wrap up by underlying things that Councillor Kavanagh and I think Councillor McKenney said, and that is what we've been talking about is the options for multi-unit dwellings not to participate in blue, black, or green bin because of space issues or insect or other smell issues in 2020 is not acceptable. And I realize when some of these buildings were built, they may not have had the space. Their garbage rooms were built for garbage, and maybe they didn't have the space to accommodate the recycling and organics that we have now. But we really need to say, you know what? It's 2020, we're moving forward, and you need to figure out a way to do this. So I'm very, very keen in that regard. So just, Mr. Chair, the presentation from staff, that will be shared with all members of council. I guess an email will go out today. Yes, that's correct. Okay, good. Okay, and I just like to encourage as many different methods of consultation as you can, recognizing it is COVID and you're limited to what you can do in public. But a lot of people who have a lot to say about waste collection may not have access or as comfortable with online as we can. So I appreciate you acknowledging that at the beginning, and I just wanted to reinforce that with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. I will say we have representation from about 17 councillors on this call, which is, to my knowledge, the best attended technical briefing I've ever been to in my 10 years. So that's quite something. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to staff for your excellent work on this. The detail provided in the technical submissions was fantastic and a great presentation, so thanks for all you've done. I'm excited to get going on this. I think it's pretty urgent, just given where we're headed with our landfill, the years we have left on our current trajectory, and the cost of procuring a new one at $300 million. I think the more residents know that, the more they're going to want to take action as well. I do think there's appetite out there, and providing the tools and education to do that is very important. So my first point is just around our education and our communication on this, because I think that's half the problem, is that people just may not know, or it's not right in front of them as much as other cities. I know Guelph really tries hard on this, and I've seen other pamphlets that cities distribute. So I think that's a big piece coming forward, is how we educate, and it's pretty, I think the bang for your buck there is pretty high. The other point I just wanted to make is around our GHG baseline emissions across the entire waste stream. So understanding how much emissions each different factor has as a baseline, so that we can know if we're getting better. And I guess a question to staff is, where are we with that? Do we have baseline data on our emissions now for each wasteline stream? And are we going to be moving in a direction we'll continue to track that?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor, for your question. So on that particular piece, we're currently working with our colleagues in our climate resiliency group. So as you'll recall, they do have their annual emissions inventory that they're responsible for working through. So while their data is a little bit high level, we have in particular data regarding our in-house fleet, as well as the emissions from our landfill. Some of the other, such as our external contractor fleet, some of that's a little bit buried further. So we're working with them to try to see if we can pull that data out. And if not, looking at other opportunities to try to get that good baseline understanding, so that when we are looking at these different options, which we will be looking at the GHG potential, we have an understanding of that core delta. So that's something we're still working through.
Okay, that's great to hear. I'm glad it's on the radar. It is something I think we should see going forward. And I've had a chance in the briefing meetings as part of the sponsors group to ask other questions. So, I have concerns around large events as well, our parks, our dog waste, but I'll leave it for another day. So thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you for calling us from your seemingly bomb shelter. I don't know where you're at, but that's
basement makeup, quarantine makeup here.
So Zoom has these virtual backgrounds. You can actually put something behind you that isn't ventilation shafts.
It's very hot down here.
Which library branch is Councillor Kavanagh in?
Alex Cullen's library branch. Okay, I'm actually going to get to Teresa. I let her ask a second question later on, but not yet. So number 8, we have Councillor El Shanziri.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Nicole and Shelley for their presentation. Nicole, I was interested in when you talk about the commercial, the ICI, and you said in your presentation, a single-tier municipality can regulate this. Can you shed a little bit more? Because we've been told before, time and time again, the ICI, it is with the provincial government mandate. So I think we need to explain that a little bit more.
Of course, and I apologize if that came off differently, because you're absolutely correct. So when it comes to the regulation of industrial, commercial, and institutional waste, that is the responsibility of the province. It's the city, what I tried to highlight through the presentation, is the city has very limited tools available in order to influence. And that's where we went through the details of the legislative toolkit, especially as it relates to business licensing, providing a little bit of detail on, again, the kind of the limited tools we have available to help drive diversion. But again, that's correct, Councillor. We as a municipality have very little role to play in that. And as well, the province hasn't given any indication that is their intent to move away from being the one primarily responsible for, or being the one that is solely responsible for regulating that industry. And I think it's also important to highlight too, so the province has come out to say that further, more aggressive management in the IC&I sector is part of their strategy moving forward. So that initially came out through their Made in Ontario Environment Plan. We haven't seen many more details, but this term of government has indicated that that is a priority for them.
My question to the chair, Mr. Chair, you and I, we met with the Minister of Environment in the past, especially about almost, I'm not sure, 6-8 months ago. And we talked about this, and they did promise they're going to revisit the ICI. And have you heard back from the Minister of Environment about this? Because the reason I'm interested in this topic, because since 2008, we reached out to the province asking about the ICI, and since the majority of the waste within anywhere is 70% of it ICI, and we haven't managed from 2008 till now to make any changes. Have you heard anything lately from the last meeting we have with the Minister of Environment in your area, I think, or in Georgia Roos's?
No, I haven't heard any update on the ICI. I know that council on multiple occasions in past years has asked for authority on that front. Given the poor diversion rates we see in that sector, and given the natural relationship that we could have between our green bin program, restaurants, and these types of things, I know that we've made the ask in previous terms. The ask usually goes unanswered, so I don't really see a lot of progress on that. It never hurts to touch on it again, but I don't see much progress in having the province give us responsibility on that front.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nicole and Shelley, for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Eli. Councillor Jean Cloutier.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the presentation. Councillor McKenney asked a question that I had with respect to the green bin data. I think that's very important. And Councillor Brockington also mentioned the importance of having the green bins at events over 500. I think that the difficulty there is that the events need volunteers to be by the green bins. We've had events where we've had green bins, but the stream gets contaminated. Unless everything is compostable, and that is becoming a little bit more the norm, and that's helping. But we want to avoid contaminating that stream. The very poor diversion rate that we see in Ottawa is residential only, and I guess my comment is it's going to be interesting in this COVID environment with the shutdown of commercial and institutional, maybe less so industrial, environment, how certainly our residential waste will increase, everyone being more at home, and the diversion rate that is incorporated in that increased rate. And I expect that to stay relatively the same, but it will increase. But that will certainly give us an indication of how much more there is out there that we can divert. And it's going to be interesting to see how we can do that. The last comment, Councillor El-Shantiri, and the limited tools, how the province has an impact on that, the limited tools, but we absolutely need to find ways to motivate, to educate, to incentivize, and to enforce with property managers, owners, and commercial administrators, the need. They are the key, and there is a need there to make sure that the waste that is produced in institutional and commercial environments, and industrial, of course, is diverted. I think that's the key. And Riley, you being the representative of the city, I think AMO has been doing a lot of work on that within AMO. So those are my comments. My question is, I'm wondering if there might not be a fund, a dedicated fund within the our waste department for communications. There's a lot of education that needs to be done with our residents, a lot of outreach that needs to be done with the ICI community. And I'm wondering if there might be a fund specifically for that outreach, that education, so that we can get that rate up. And my last comment is, while we have a putrid rate at high 40s, even 60% is I don't want that to be our target. I want the target to be 70s and 80%, unless we want to find 250 million to build a new landfill in the next 20 years. We have to get that to 70 and 80%. Again, thank you for the presentation. Those are my comments and my small question.
Thank you, Councillor. So to your question about the our public education budget, so for this year, we do have a dedicated budget geared to promotion and education. So it's just over $250,000 this year will be spent on that. Now, your comment though was in relation to the IC&I sector. So this is specifically focused on the residential sector. And a good chunk of our focus and our priorities for this year are encouraging participation in the city's Green Bin program.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Jean. We're going to go back to Councillor Kavanagh. And earlier, Riley was asking what library she's in. Let's be honest. I made a joke that said it's Alex Collins Library. We all know Teresa reads more books than Alex, so it's clearly.
I read, but I don't keep the books. I move them on. I don't let them store up.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. We're in a unique situation, has been pointed out by Councillor Cloutier, with the COVID-19 situation. It's only when restaurants aren't operating, and we could get some valuable stats of what's going on in terms of the difference, because we can see the contrast here of diversion, etc. I think this could be very valuable to AMO to show the differences in terms of. We know that the diversion rate at institutions is not great, so I appreciate my colleagues raising those questions. That's what I was going to ask about, was on the institution side. So that I think would be very valuable. Is it possible to get some information? I mean, it's a relatively short time, but it's getting longer all the time. But I think it shows interesting statistics of when people are all at home and they're not using restaurants and institutions as much.
Absolutely, Councillor. So we will be providing some of that data. So in one of the slides, we had specifically broken down data from March 6th, so right before the COVID situation began, up until April 6th. And so we have that data to be able to show in comparison to this time last year. And you're absolutely correct. So we've seen quite, on the garbage, the blue bin and black bin, in and around averages of 10%. But what's most remarkable is to see we're seeing upwards of 300% increase in tonnages coming in through the organics program. So we'll absolutely share that information.
Yeah, I think that will be helpful, and it's useful to show the province in terms of the differences of that. Education, yes, my colleagues have raised it. I really find it still not very good. I just walked by blue bins, on garbage day, which was today, and I can tell that that people are not getting messages like cleaning out bottles and things like that. Very small things, but it adds up. And after our very useful tour of these facilities, I learned a lot of why they're important, and I don't think it's getting through. I think that we have to do better. I wish we could send everybody on a tour to get them, to appreciate and I think that probably the thing that works a lot is people to realize how much money we make on this, and to emphasize the fact that it saves you tax dollars if you do it right, because I don't think it really is clicking for a good number of people. So I would love to see that emphasized. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh. No, it's certainly one of the challenges we have is reaching people. You look at what we experienced in zones 2 and 4 and somewhat zone 1 just last week, where we had to bump garbage collection for 1 day. And we try to get the message through the media. Obviously, our media helped very much with that, with messaging that through social media, on the radio, in the news, and then us putting it out various message forms, using our recollect tools, letting people know. But still, just the amount of people that put their garbage out on their regular garbage day, not knowing that it was delayed a week. It is challenging for us to reach folks. So I don't. Councillor King, did you just stick your hand up? You had a question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I had a few brief questions.
Okay, so I had given some rules about using the chat function.
And I did. I sent you a chat, a little note.
I see nothing. Oh my God, it's way up there. I'm so sorry, Ralston. You can blame Sean, Teresa, and Jean for messaging me at the same time, which put yours to the front. All right, go ahead, Ralston.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank city staff for the informative technical briefing. It's very excellent. I just wanted to ask two brief questions. I know in one of the previous reports that committee had received, there was mention of not just reduce, reuse, and recycle, which most residents are aware of, but there was also a focus that British Columbia utilizes a 5R pollution prevention hierarchy that also includes a recovery and residuals. So I was wondering if you could actually speak to that a little bit on how that could be, those two additional R's, how they can contribute to landfill reduction.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Good question. So, and you're absolutely right. So one of the fundamental pieces that Council did endorse to when we initially took the roadmap report was undertaking the framework of looking at the 5 R's beyond what we've traditionally focused on is the 3 R's. So you'll see in a lot of the technical memorandums and the work that we've done so far is really heavily focused on broadening that scope to the 5 R's. So providing us with some insight into those different opportunities. So when it comes to your specific question about diversion, will those particular 2 elements really help drive diversion? Not necessarily, but when it comes to recovery, we're recognizing too there's alignment potentially with some of our goals as it relates to the climate change master plan, and also through our energy evolution strategy when we're starting to look at opportunities to create more of a focus on renewable energy, and recognizing that we do, organics as an example is a renewable or can create some of that renewable energy. So absolutely, we're going to be exploring those options.
That's excellent. And I have another question, and that really revolves around maybe talking to and addressing the challenges of waste diversion in city facilities, especially with high public traffic, such as daycare centers. I'm just wondering, what are we doing there around waste diversion?
So that is something that falls within the purview of our colleagues in our facilities group, but that is something we're going to be exploring through the master plan, is not only what we're doing from managing and helping encourage diversion in our residential sector, but also how we're doing as a municipality, our own operation. So it's kind of twofold. There's opportunity to improve when it comes to managing our waste that we're producing as an organization. But then there's also that component which ties in strongly too with education. Especially when it comes to using those facilities or using those programs within our various facilities. It's not unique to Ottawa. That tends to be one of the bigger challenges is whether it be contamination, but also low diversion, specifically in public places. So within the scope of the master plan too, we're going to be looking at those different options and also working with our colleagues very closely that are responsible for overseeing our facilities and the various options to see where those opportunities lie to be able to further drive and further lead by example.
Well, that's excellent. I think education is kind of the continuing refrain from a lot of the councillors around this virtual table. And I really appreciate the work that you've done in terms of this briefing, and look forward to further correspondence on and further reports on the efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
As Councillor Manette always used to say, educate, don't legislate. We're going to go to Councillor Riley Brockington has a follow-up. He promised it's just one. And if it's not just one, I'm going to cut your mic off.
No problem, I promise. Nicole, just a question came in online. The very high increases in organic collection within the last month, are you able to determine whether it's literally household organic waste, or with people home now raking, collecting yard waste, whether that is the reason why our numbers have shot up so much?
So unfortunately, it is very difficult for us to be able to decipher between what we're seeing in relation to organics versus leaf and yard waste, especially when they're commingled, because we do accept it commingled in the green bin program. But that is likely a contributing factor as well.
Thank you. While we're here, we have a message that people should be only putting out limited amounts of leaf and yard waste as we go through this, just to manage better for our employees, our contractors that are out there collecting waste. So that is all I have for questions from councillors. Did any of the assistants want to ask any questions? I have Robin had to go, Chelsea, Tom, Rosa, Heather, Patrick. No, sorry, that's not. Yeah, Patrick, Danielle McGee, Andrew, Alex, Stephanie, Rob, or Megan. Any questions from any of you? Seeing none. The members of the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee. I know Corey Peabody is still here. I don't know if Paul Jaswal is still here, but if you have any questions, by all means, you can jump in. There appears to be none there as well. Now, again, a reminder, you will have an opportunity to speak to this when we finally meet again in person in 2026. And then we want to, so I'm just going to hand this off back to Keena, because I know we're going to take a break and then we're going to come back for questions from the media, but I'll let Keena speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for attending the tech briefing. We'll be taking a quick 15-minute break, and then we will be facilitating a media availability with media. The YouTube live link will still be available if councillors would like to follow on there. So we're just going to give 15 minutes in order for everybody to take it, freshen up, and then take a quick break, and we'll be back shortly for city staff.
Great, and thank you, Keena, and thank you to everyone else who's been on with us for the last 2 hours, and much appreciated. Thank you as well to our interpreters. We have 4 interpreters here helping to keep us connected with the folks who cannot hear us, and quite often they cannot hear us more than just because of the mute function. So we really appreciate the efforts of them being here today with us. So thank you, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Nicole, thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour la deuxième partie de la séance virtuelle. So I'll be doing a quick roll call. I see everybody on the line and just want to make sure the audio is good to go. We've got Joanne Chianello at CBC.
Yep.
Hi, Joanne. And then we have Julien Paquette au droit.
Oui.
Merci. John Willing at the Ottawa Citizen.
Hey, Kina.
Thank you. Gilles Taillon, Radio-Canada.
Oui.
Merci. And Sue Sharing on the City with the Birds.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Hi, Sue.
Hi.
So I'll be doing one question and one follow-up from each media. On a une question, ensuite une question de suivi pour chaque média. And I'll start alphabetically with Joanne Chianello.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for that presentation this morning. I'm sorry if I missed this, but I was wondering if somebody has a breakdown of all of the waste produced in Ottawa, including IC&I, and how much is residential, how much is IC&I, and how much does IC&I actually recycle?
So to your question, Joanne, we don't have the information for the IC&I sector. We particularly have it with respect to the city's responsibility, that being the residential sector. And unfortunately, the information with respect to the IC&I sector isn't always necessarily publicly available.
Can I just get a political answer from that too? Like, Scott, are you there, I assume, somewhere? No. I don't know who's on this call.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Right. I was just wondering if, like, is that acceptable to you? Like, you know, we're asking the residents to do so many things, do all this recycling, and what is the IC&I sector doing, right? Like, we work in these two separate silos as if we're not related, which is not true. Of course, that's not the way we live.
Yeah, I mean, generally, it's been long understood that the diversion rate in the IC&I sector is barely above single digits. Which is obviously quite concerning, and it's something that we don't want to see. It's kind of one of the reasons why councils of the past have pushed to see if we could actually take control of it ourselves, to see if we could do a better job. That said, the province recently has been somewhat, I don't know what the word would be, but they seem to be more interested than in the past in working toward better diversion rates with the IC&I sector, and trying to put more in place to make sure that we see something better out of that. They keep on approving landfills and landfill expansions in our area, specifically for the IC&I sector. Meanwhile, the last thing we want to do is get a new residential use landfill. So mixed messaging from the province on that a little bit, regardless of which government is in place. So clearly we want to see more on that.
Thanks. And so my follow-up is, you know, I've been covering the green bin since it literally started at City Hall. And, you know, in the last few years, like, the diversion rate has barely moved. It's very frustrating for lots of people who care about it. And I know there's a lot that's going to come out in the technical, in the reports. I look forward to reading them. But I was wondering if, from both a city point of view and from a elected official point of view, you can talk about why we stalled, what your thoughts are about why perhaps we stalled, and what specifically do we need to do to move that forward? Because there seems to have been a lot of education. Is there really not enough education? Do we need to have something slightly more punitive? I hate to use that word, but, you know, just your thoughts generally on why we seem to be stalled at about 50%. Thank you.
I mean, I can start on that, then can go to Nicole. I think, you know, when you look at some of the challenges that we have, and if you go back to the Hill and Knowlton report that we released last year, we saw that, you know, curbside participation in the green bin is actually quite high, but that's really for towns and single family homes. And the more that we seem to increase the amount of multi-res in the city, the less likely we're going to see that larger diversion number increase. You know, it actually fits in well with the conversation we're going to have in 12 days on urban boundary expansion, because we're going to go to a point where we have more low-rise development and more intensified uses across the city. And if we don't find a solution to engaging those residents in those multi-res buildings, then we're going to see, you know, more stagnation on our citywide diversion rate. I don't think personally, I don't think the issue is the single family homes. I think we actually are seeing good participation there. I think with the increase in the allowance of the use of plastic bags, one thing that we actually encourage people to use over the last few weeks because of COVID-19, but also just people increasing the use because we took that messy factor out of that. That was the response from the single family home users. It wasn't the response from the multi-res folks. The issue wasn't necessarily messiness, it was access. So the diversion rate that we have is pulled down because of access to use. And that's a whole part of phase 2 and phase 3 here, is how can we get to a point where we even provide more people that use. We never envisioned it. In 2008, when this started, there was never a plan to go into multi-res at that time. And that was a bit of a hole that we started from. We're still trying to climb out of it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And also, I'm sorry, Nicole, I hope you have something to say too.
Yeah, so just to follow on to what the chair had mentioned, so just going back to that Hill and Knowlton market research that we did do, or we conducted last year, the number one reason for curbside residents not participating, the yuck factor. So as you would have seen within the presentation, since we have introduced the plastic bags as a liner option, we have seen some positive trending with respect to tonnages. And of course, we are going to be doing some additional studies later this year, specifically tailored to understanding how that's impacted participation, but also getting an understanding of the effectiveness of the communications and the education tools that we've been using so far, and if they've actually hit the mark with respect to shifting residents' behavior. And then when it comes to the multi-residential sector, as a municipality, we're not the only one facing challenges. When you look at a lot of our comparator municipalities, we're in and around very similar diversion rates. And for those that have seen increases, they're upwards of about 30% diversion. We're going to be taking a look to see if there are opportunities, lessons learned that we can consider implementing here. But as the chair had mentioned, again, through that Hill and Knowlton market research, convenience and access is the number one challenge for individuals living in the multi-residential sector. Convenience, when it comes to, if you have a garbage chute, as an example, some of those older facilities, making it a lot less convenient to walk down a series of floors in order to get to your recycling room to recycle. But also access to the green bin program. So we know about 36% of multi-residential facilities throughout the city have a green bin program in place. And what we're doing is we're driving to try to change that. So not only will we be looking at options through the master plan in phases 2, but we have some ongoing efforts. So we've made some changes to our most recent collection contracts to try to address some of the barriers that have been identified by property owners, but that's just one step. That's the one step of getting the program in place in these buildings. And then there's that second component to try to address those barriers and the convenience aspect that seems to be holding residents back from participating.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much. Also, just a reminder, we'd love to have that presentation, your presentation, because those slides are a really huge addition to our web story, so that they always look great. And thanks again for your, all right, that's it. Thank you. Good seeing everybody, sort of.
Joanne, we did send the link to the presentation. If you have issues accessing it, just let me know.
Oh, I didn't see it. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll move on to Julien Paquette, Le Droit.
Hi, my question would be regarding the access to green bins and the multi-residential units. Is there any way to make it mandatory to have access to them?
That is one of the options that we will be exploring as part of phase 2, but again, also exploring other potential options that might be considered less punitive as well.
Yeah, and just to add to, I mean, exactly what Nicole just said, the issue with mandatory is that it has to be followed with something punitive. So how would that, how would that look? Is that really going to be effective if you're just going to start finding building owners? So it certainly has to be a part of the conversation. We know we've seen interest in mandatory participation. It's come up at council before, but we really need that proper conversation to understand the full impact of that.
Okay, just to be clear, it's going to be part of the conversation. All right. Okay. And my next question would be, regarding the single home, I know you saying that the participation rate is pretty good for the green bins. Is there any way to make it even better? If you look at some just across the river at Gatineau, they've reduced the size of their garbage bins to force people to use more of their. But here it's brown bins, but to force people to use more of their green bins. Is that something that could be looked at as well?
Absolutely. So we'll be looking at all various program and policy options. So that'll include, limiting the size of it could be bag limits that we're taking a look at, the options of clear bag, tag a bag programs, and as you mentioned too, similar to Gatineau, they have a containerized system in place. So looking at exploring containerized systems as well as putting limits on the amount of waste. So those are all the various policy options and more that will be considered in an effort to try to drive participation in the various programs.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Julien. On to Sue Sharing.
Thanks very much. I just want to start by saying those two staff presentations were really good. I've sat through a lot of them and I learned a lot today. My first question, it would appear to me that we have sort of two options on the table. We either build another landfill or we give some serious consideration to incineration, which I believe has its own set of issues. And I think this would, like Joanne, I think this is probably both a staff and political question. So if council voted on a option, landfill or incineration in the next year, which I think is, probably very optimistic, when could we see either one of those, given that we're going to run out of landfill in like 20 years?
Well, I can start on that. Ultimately, and I said this at the start of our solid waste master plan process, the second last option, in my opinion, this is my opinion, the second last option politically is a mass burn incinerator. The last option for the city would be a new landfill. Every other option that could come up, including diversion, other technologies, different options, they all come ahead of those two options. I would not want to see council make a decision on a Durham type facility, which has not proven environmentally or financially as sustainable as they said it would, or certainly another landfill. The last thing I want to see is another landfill. In fact, I would guarantee that we won't have another landfill because I think we will find other options over the next 20 years. And any of those options take 10 years. If we wanted to start that today, a new landfill or an incinerator, it would take 10 years. And that's obviously that gets us to 2030. We have until 2042. Hopefully we don't see a massive increase in waste over the duration of this COVID situation, and that doesn't impact us, but then also we have to account for the growth. So really diversion, waste reduction and waste diversion are the two most important things in this conversation at the top of the chart, because that's what allows us to extend the landfill. That's what allows us to put off.
Sorry, Scott, I missed, you said waste diversion and
waste reduction.
Okay,
so
thanks.
Reducing a great part of right now, what we're looking at in the amount of people that are getting takeout, takeout containers, that's something that the homeowner doesn't control. That's waste you bring into your house that is out of your control as to what kind of waste that is. And a lot of times it has to go in the garbage. Those are the types of things that I think I would like to see the province regulate. Stop diddling with grocery store bags and start focusing on things that really cause capacity issues in our landfill and really are environmentally unfriendly, that have no other use.
And a staff response?
Yeah, so it's similar to what the chair had identified. So we've heard from council, and we have clear direction as they approved the roadmap report for developing the solid waste master plan last year, that there's a high interest in focusing heavily on diversion in an effort to extend the life of the Trail Road landfill, which is an extremely valuable asset for the city. And they've adopted the more modern and progressive approach to waste management of being the 5 R's. So focusing more first on opportunities to reduce opportunities to reuse, then recycle, opportunities for recovery, all before we consider getting to the point of residual disposal. So we're hoping through these discussions that we will be able to find some tangible opportunities to be able to increase diversion so that we can further extend the life of the landfill.
And my next question, and it ties in very well with my first one, because I have to admit I'm a bit shocked. I'm hoping you're both right. I'm hoping we don't have to have another landfill. But what is the reticence? Given the importance of extending the life of the landfill and diversion, etc., is it time to consider more punitive? What's the word I'm looking for? To be more punitive against the taxpayer. You say that the green bin use is up, but I look down my street and there's barely any. I get tired as a taxpayer and someone who cares about this issue, paying for all of this when so many people don't appear to be following it. Isn't it time to start finding these guys? And again, both staff and Scott.
Yeah, and this obviously comes up a lot, the notion of being punitive. And I just going back to the last comment I made, a lot of the times it's not the end user's fault as to what kind of waste they end up with. So that's when I talk about waste reduction and diversion, we shouldn't penalize people for the kind of waste they end up with when it's not their choice. I'm really concerned about that. And I think if you go back to the Hill Knowlton report as well, is that it showed that some of the numbers that were the lowest in terms of diversion, some of the folks that were putting more stuff in garbage than others were actually some of our low-income communities. These are communities that cannot afford punitive measures to be taken on them, and it won't actually help the situation because again, it's an access issue. I think there's maybe some belief that people in suburban Ottawa don't care and they don't use the green bin. I don't think that putting in punitive measures is going to solve the problem in some of the areas where we know that it's a bigger problem. You might get a few folks in rural Ottawa and a few folks in the suburbs to latch on because of that. But ultimately, where we're seeing that the major issues are in places that don't have access, or the access is limited, and to punish them for that, I don't think would be the right method, personally.
And just building on the chair's comments there, so this is really going to be part of the fundamental conversation that we're having in the community over the next year in particular. It's really getting an understanding of how far, how fast we want to move as a community. And at this point, all options are on the table when it comes to looking at potentially more punitive options and less punitive options. But as the councillor mentioned, there are further opportunities, and not just necessarily looking at those curbside policy options. We have to look at things a little bit more holistically, and seeing that there is more opportunity with education and promotion too, especially in some of these communities where there isn't a clear understanding of the core benefits and the importance of diversion when it comes to the environmental impact. So again, those are some of the conversations we're going to be having with the community.
I do want to preface too with that my comments that this is going to look at all options. So this review will look at options. I have opinions on certain things, but this review will cover all options, and everyone will have a chance to touch on those options, including punitive measures.
Thanks, Chair. Moving on to John Willing.
Hi, thank you. I'm just going through the slide deck quickly right now, and I know there's one slide speaking to the COVID era collection numbers. One thing I'm not sure that's in here, and forgive me that if it is the diversion rate over the period beginning with the start of the, I guess, COVID era. Is there a diversion rate you can give us over that time?
So you're correct. The slide more speaks to what the average increase is with respect to tonnages versus the diversion rate. I don't have that with me right now, but that's something we could follow up on.
Okay, just by way of follow-up, with the federal single-use plastics ban approaching in the near future, has the city, Nicole or Scott, done any analysis as to how that's going to affect the organics program and what new measures the city might have to take, to replace the plastic component with something maybe people want to use?
So I can jump in first. So John, on that topic, it's still very early in the process. We don't really have a clear understanding at this point yet where the federal government is going with that particular piece of legislation. So it's a little difficult to speculate at this point. But I think of course, if they are moving in the direction of completely removing plastic bagging options from the market, I mean, that's something that we will have to adapt to, absolutely, but it's still a little bit too early in the process to tell what that's going to look like. To date, they have focused heavily more so on, plastic grocery bags in part of their discussions, and not necessarily some of those other bagging options that we've highly been encouraging residents to reuse, the product packaging that they're receiving, whether it be, as an example, your bread bags. Again, we're still not quite sure at this point how broad of a scope that federal legislation will entail.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And I think too, you mentioned, you kind of started your question with speaking about the impacts of COVID, and I think that's, that might play into some of the discussions at the federal level too. I mean, when it comes to a ban on single-use plastics from the federal government, I will believe it when I see it. I think when we started allowing it in the green bin, I fully understood that it was something that could not be long lasting. And the hope is that you get people using the bin that weren't previously using it, and they become accustomed to using the bin. And then that becomes just part of their natural weekly routine, and that, this garbage gets collected weekly. And if I go back to the garbage bag, it gets collected bi-weekly. So hopefully people start to become more accustomed to using the green bin, and then they find alternative ways to keep on participating in that process. But I think just building back on the COVID stuff, we've seen a lot of places move away from reusable bags during this time. And is that going to impact the discussions on the grocery store bags? The last thing I want to see is people going and buying Glad garbage bags. I use the word Glad, I shouldn't use the brand, but to buy actual bags and putting them in their green bin. The whole point was that we want people to use what they already have. And whether that's the bag that you stuff your meat into, your meat pack into at the grocery store, it's the milk bag, or as Nicole said, the bread bag, finding options to continue to participate in it without going out and buying brand new bags to put in your green bin, that would be counterproductive.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Gilles Taillon, vas-y.
Oui, bonjour. Les chiffres publiés aujourd'hui, les chiffres dont vous avez parlé, sont exactement les mêmes que ceux que nous avions publiés sur nos sites de CBC et Radio-Canada en septembre 2018. Donc, de toute évidence, vos efforts de sensibilisation ne fonctionnent pas. Vous avez déjà essayé pas mal de choses, là, mais entre vous et moi, là, est-ce que c'est une cause désespérée ou s'il y a encore de l'espoir et comment on peut y arriver?
Bonjour, c'est Marilyn Journeau. Oui, il y a plusieurs choses qu'on peut faire pour améliorer le taux de diversion dans la ville d'Ottawa. Et ça, c'est le but de le plan de gestion de la ville, c'est identifier et toutes les options pour améliorer le taux de diversion.
Est-ce que je pourrais vous demander de vous déplacer de l'écran parce que je ne vous vois pas et on doit vous enregistrer en même temps, là. Oui, c'est mieux. OK. Alors, je voulais vous demander aussi, on a parlé beaucoup ces dernières années, il y a eu des tentatives de la Ville d'Ottawa pour ce qui est de prolonger la durée de vie du dépotoir du chemin trail, entre autres avec l'usine Plasco, ça n'a pas fonctionné. Tantôt, lors du point de presse, de la présentation, la technique, on a parlé de nouvelles technologies. À part l'incinération, est-ce qu'il y a vraiment autre chose en ce moment de disponible sur le marché qui pourrait être utilisé pour prolonger la durée de vie du dépotoir?
On a identifié plusieurs technologies dans le mémo avec le rapport. Et il y a plusieurs technologies, mais il y a des technologies qui sont nouveaux aussi. Et on va regarder toutes les choses dans le prochain étage de le plan.
Est-ce que je peux vous poser une petite dernière?
Oui.
Vu que là, vous êtes bien placé là.
Gilles, if you don't mind,
yeah, just that the first,
okay.
Yeah, it's just the first question. Madame Journeau wasn't in the shot. That's the clip I need. If you don't mind, that's the last one. I will, if you please. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So, alors, Madame Journeau, dites-moi tout simplement, là, on a parlé du fait que le taux de récupération, de diversion stagne. Là, M. Moffatt parlait, on disait on ne peut pas imposer d'amende, la clientèle à revenu faible, la faible revenu, bon, c'est difficile. Est-ce qu'effectivement, là, il va falloir passer à une autre étape que la sensibilisation d'après vous?
Mais on va regarder toutes les options. Il y a les bacs comme en la ville de Gatineau. Il y a des sacs en plastique transparents. Il y a peut-être des taux pour chaque sac, tag bags, un système comme ça. Il y a plusieurs choses qu'on peut faire pour améliorer le taux de diversion dans la ville, mais ça, on va étudier tout ça dans la deuxième phase, deuxième étage de le plan. Et à la fin de l'année, on va venir encore à conseil pour communiquer les options.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Okay, merci.
Gilles, if you don't mind, I would like to just add to the second question that you had about when you were talking about the other alternative technologies, as long as you don't mind me responding in English.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thanks.
Okay, so just on that, one of the challenges, one of the problems I always felt with Plasco after the fact, of course, I mean, that ended on December 31st, 2014, by virtue of council resolution, was that we tied our I guess we hitched our wagon, you could say, to one option. I wouldn't want to see us do that again. I would like to look at other options to see what's out there. There are no shortage of folks that contact us to pitch us on ideas of what they could do in this city. I would be very open to allowing multiple companies to come forward and suggest what they could do here and have them compete against one another. I'm not interested in giving any one company any sort of license that precludes anyone else from jumping in at the same time. So that, to me, that was the issue with Plasco. We spent 10 years on it. It didn't work. I wish it did, because it was an incredible deal from a capital perspective. But if someone else comes forward, let them bring their technology forward. Let's see if it works. We do have time, but if other companies want to come forward and do the same thing, let's try to evaluate those at the same time. And if someone comes out of it giving us a proper solution, then we'll all be better for it.
Is there a technology that is still not, that is proven, not experimental?
There's a number of technologies out there that just don't process the amount of waste that we take in. We have been in touch with multiple potential suitors, multiple potential products that can help us, but not to the extent of the sheer tonnage that we see at our landfill every single day. And I know things have been going on in places like Edmonton, but it just hasn't got to a point where it becomes just a turnkey option for Ottawa. Like I said, I don't want to see us go, personally, I don't want to see us do what Durham did. I don't think it's affordable. I don't think it's environmentally sound. I don't think any community wants that in their backyard. There's a reason why the one along the 401 is in the middle of nowhere. So I think we should be open to new technologies. We shouldn't feel like we were burned by Plasco, even though they didn't burn anything else. We should be open to see what's possible out there going forward.
Okay, thank you everybody for your time. This is all the time we have for now. Thanks everyone for attending. Merci à toutes tous d'être avec nous. Bonne journée. Have a great day.
Thank you, Kina. Thank you, everyone else.